We should bring in a more cross-cultural perspective here. I mean, I don't know if we've been mainly talking about dying from a Western perspective, but if we compare this to other countries, other cultures around the world, is the experience of dying much different?
Well, I mean, death is one of those things that you can write, thousands and thousands of books about. I mean, every culture has its own little customs and things. But when it comes to dying, there are not many different ways to die. I'm not talking about necessarily the difference between suicide and cancer dying and death row, to just take three random examples. But in terms of the history of humanity, 99% of our way of dying has been sudden or due to infectious disease. It's been very quick.
You're talking about before the era of modern medicine.
Yeah.
I'm talking about before the last ice age, actually. So it's about 1.5 million years of human history. Modern medicine, yes. So up to the last ice age, people died rather suddenly. So when they talked about dying, they talked about another world journey. That's where they put dying.
Right.
So rather ironically, for most hunter-gatherer societies, dying begins after death.
There's the beginning of a long journey into the unknown.
Yes, where you may actually really die.
Huh.
You may actually really die if you don't survive the trials that you encounter there.
Mm-hmm. So this is why at burial sites there might be clothes, artifacts, weapons even, because you might need those in the next stage, wherever you're going.
The normal things you would take in the subway. So, but after settlement, when people started to die slowly of things and life expectancy increased, then we had this dying in bed with family and so forth. And then there was the rise of the professionals, which really began in the cities, the doctor, the lawyer, the priest. Those kinds of people became really important. And in modern day, post-modernity or modern society, contemporary society, has actually been created in the image of the city. So in that sense, urban modern life is really creates a kind of dying where we're surrounded by professionals who are largely taking care of us. And then we get this institutional dying that we're trying to extricate ourselves from and worry about. So in a cultural sense, these are the major forms of diversity in dying. But cross-cutting that, of course, is that the way we think about dying in affluent societies is that it's going to be slow. We're going to be in a nursing home, or we're going to die of cancer or motor neuron disease or organ failure. In India and Africa, large parts of China, that's not going to be the case, where infectious diseases still reign, where trauma by being poisoned by the water or by a snake is still common. Mm-hmm. And so you get that kind of diversity around dying too. But dying is one of those things with remarkable steady patterns compared to death customs.
Well, what about different religious traditions? I mean, does it matter whether you are Hindu or Muslim or Christian or believer in a particular African religion? I mean, are there different approaches to thinking about dying?
I think there are. I think there are major differences, and I think one of the breakdowns to just simplify things is, and I think this really does impact how people experience death and think about death, is in the Western monotheisms. It's a kind of one life model where we're created by a singular God and we're born once. We have one life and then we die. That's it. And then you branch off into some kind of afterlife depending on your deeds. So there, death has a kind of finality, and the ego, the social ego, the self, is imagined as lasting for eternity. So you have this language about seeing your loved ones in heaven. It's the ego itself that survives this process. Whereas in Asia, Hinduism and Buddhism, this notion of karma and reincarnation is actually, I think, in some ways more interesting, because it insists that something survives death, but then it reincarnates in another body and in another and another and another. But the key here is that what's reincarnating is not the social self. It's not the ego. Because if you can imagine you having many, many lives. You were one person 3 lives ago, and then you were somebody completely different 2 lives ago, and then you were somebody completely different the last life, and now you're someone completely different again. So clearly it's not the ego that lasts, clearly.
So what changes if, say, you believe in that form of reincarnation? I mean,
Well-
do you live your life any differently because of that?
I would imagine you must. I mean, life is not. This is not a one shot. You're caught in an immense stream of lifetimes, stretching back as far as you can see in the past and maybe into the future. I think it's a very different worldview, and I think it must impact how you approach a death.